Hi, everyone. I have this talk about building a better developer experience via building on Slack. And I will just introduce myself real quick. Like, I always hate these introductions, but it's like, trust me, this time it's kind of relevant. So I'm Bence Nagy, and I work as the software platform lead of kiwi.com, which I guess I need to explain. Also, the rest of the talk is going to be in Hungarian. I hope you're okay with that. No, okay, I'm just kidding. I'm scoping out the room. Like, you're pretty receptive to jokes. That's nice. All right, so the platform team, the team I'm working in. Basically, the goal of my team is to build or help our developers build better software faster. And yes, that's basically the DevOps manifesto. And we are pretty much a DevOps team just by a different name. The point here is that we are building libraries for our developers, or writing guidelines, or writing tutorial articles, or just trying to figure out anything that will help them work better. So you might ask, like, why are we bothering with Slack? And basically, to explain this, I'll have to show you some of my own data about how I work. Basically, I measure everything I do on my computer. I have data going back for like 5 years. And I looked at the data, and of course, I'm not making this decision but just based on my own usage. But it's a pretty good indicator of how our engineers work. You can see on the chart that most of the time of an engineer is actually spent on communications instead of coding. Like, it's right around 55% in my case. And okay, there's a caveat. I am kind of a Slack addict. That's really like not a nice thing. So I'm the kind of person who spends all day on Slack, checking all of the channels and so on. But still, I think, and it really seems like this generalizes to developers. And let's say at least 20–30% of a developer's time would be just communication about features, requirements, or whatever else. If we go back to our mission, my platform team's mission, it was better software faster. And based on this, we can kind of break that down into smaller fragments that are easier to work with. And one of these fragments would be having better communication faster. And this is basically why we are dealing with Slack and why we are working so much on coming up with guidelines on how to use Slack and coming up with nice integrations with the rest of the workflow. All right, so I will just go to an intermission right now for the fun little story I want to tell you. And if you might be asking, why am I calling this an intermission when it's the start of the talk? Well, you're not the police, and I do what I want, so it is an intermission. Basically, it's a story of worst communication slower at Kiwi is the least productive, and yet the most impressive thing we have on Slack. As many of you are Slack users, you know that the general channel is the one with everyone in the company. It's around 2,000 people for us. And sometimes people don't understand this. And sometimes people post random messages like this. So last year, somebody, Gone Girl, posted a message which just said 0, like obviously an accident. People reacted with a couple of reactions. Also, this user, Gone Girl, I just realized that she actually is gone. Like, now her account is deactivated. I hope she didn't leave the company because of this. But anyway, what actually happened with this 0 is that people realized they can start counting by increments of 1. And again, let me stress, this was 2017 September, over a year ago. And today, we are still going strong, and we are at 3,621. So yeah, that was the most impressive, least productive thing we have at Kiwi. All right, so let's get back to some serious, talking about what we are actually going to do to improve communication. I'm going to talk about 2 specific strategies. The first one I would like to call the Info Hub. I just made this name up yesterday, so don't Google it. You're not going to find any good results. It's like weird enterprise companies. I don't know what they're selling, but yeah, so the Info Hub. And the point of having an Info Hub somewhere on Slack is to bring some sort of structure and bring some automation to the announcements that people are making. So let's just try to figure out when we need structure in our announcements. Basically, before you start developing anything like this, just ask yourself a few questions about communication at your company. What types do people announce? And this is meant in the software engineering, analytical kind of types, where I'm actually talking about like classes or structs in code. Some types of announcements would be something like downtimes or new releases going out, or actually like going for lunch. And this last one, I'm actually, like all three, I'm going to be using during this presentation. The going for lunch is just because it's like the simplest thing I could think of. It's really nice as an example. You could also consider like new client announcements as a type, which actually means that my talk is not specifically about bringing, like, improving developer experience, but rather just communication experience for anybody, because like new clients would be announced by whatever, business people. All right, so let's delve a bit deeper into these types. So when I say going for lunch announcement is a type, I'm picturing something like this. We have some code which describes a lunch announcement, and it has 3 attributes that is important for going for lunch. Somebody will probably include the location where they are going, which refers to a restaurant. They include a timestamp of when they are leaving, and they include a list of people, perhaps, who they are going with. Also, the restaurant that they are referring to is going to have like some sort of a menu, which is a list of meals, also pretty relevant information when an announcement is being made. Okay, so these are the types I'm going to be talking about. Picture something like this. So now, after you've kind of tried to figure out what types of communication you have, what types of messages there are, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions before figuring out whether you need to bring some structure to them and bring some automation. So, first of all, which of these types are going to be complex? Obviously not the launch announcement. This was like 3 attributes or whatever. But you're going to have some types with 10 different attached data points. And if people are making these announcements manually, they are going to miss some of this information. They are going to provide unclear data. Like one of my favorite examples of this is when people are talking about time in messages and they don't realize that half of the company is in different time zones, so they have no idea what you're talking about. So these complex types will probably benefit from some structure. So which types are frequently used? Lunch announcements, again, let's say like twice a day. Wait, no, we have lunch once a day. Never mind. So once a day, but you have lots of releases in one day. If you're like a company like Kiwi, we have, let's say, like 50 or 100 releases maybe every day. Which of the types are most interacted with? Like a lunch announcement, again, not many people are going to care about it. But when you're talking about what you're releasing to production, there's going to be lots of comments, questions, and so on. And the last thing that you might want to ask yourself is which types are the most important to actually have accurate information on. Again, your business is not going to go down, you're not going to go bankrupt if somebody says they are going to one restaurant and they actually went to another. But it might be very important to have correct information about how your downtimes are going and when you're going to recover from outages. All right, so these are basically the questions on when you might want to do something like what I'm going to talk about, like in the next part of the presentation. And one more like kind of advice here is like don't start actually calculating values. You don't need a data sheet and you don't need analytics on this. Just like try to think about it and talk about it with your teammates. The best prospects for some structure are going to be super clear, like it's going to be 10 times or 100 times more important based on just thinking than the second best one. All right, so this was very theoretical so far, so I'm just going to show you a couple of our examples, specifically the releases first. Here's what we have for release announcements. It looks like this. And I'm just going to leave it up for a couple seconds so you can, oh yeah, so beautiful. Okay, so this is an open source project. It's called Crane. It's by kiwi.com, obviously. We wrote it ourselves and then open sourced it. If you want to release announcements like this, you might want to copy paste some of the code, but unless you are using the exact same tools that we do, like GitLab CI and Rancher for container orchestration, like the software is not actually going to be very helpful for you. But you can copy paste the code, so that's nice. And the second type that we try to structure better is the announcement of downtimes, which looks something like this. And this is also actually going to be open sourced in just a couple of weeks. I put the repo link up there, but it doesn't exist yet, so just follow our engineering blog, code.kiwi.com, and you're going to get an update when it goes live. All right, so what did we just see here? Like, what makes one of the good info hubs? Why did I say that Crane is so beautiful? Obviously because I made it, so it's like my baby. But the first really important thing is, of course, good coverage of the information related to the types. So when you have, did you raise your hand because you wanted a question? No, okay, well then nice head scratching, I liked it. All right, so good data coverage. Basically, if you picture those attributes on the classes, you just want to cover most of them, but of course there's a balance to be found because you don't want to spam people with irrelevant information. You don't need to go super deep in some cases. Again, just try to find the balance of what's useful for at least 10% of people in the messages. For instance, you wouldn't actually place the entire patch that we are releasing inside the message. That would be silly. But when you encounter something like this, a good element to use in an info hub is to provide links. I would say that in a good integration with complex data, with complex connected data, around 80% of the message should be actually blue, because everything should be linked. Even though you don't have the information in line, just like being a signpost is great for being a hub. Just point people in the right direction. Okay, the next thing that a good info hub does well is not being like my clicker, which apparently didn't work. Oh yeah, it did. All right. So the next thing is directing attention. Basically, when humans just sit down in front of their keyboards, they don't really think about how to present the data, what is actually important to highlight in anything specifically. So when something like reverting a broken release happens, they will just type, oh, well, I'm reverting this last release. While this information might very easily get lost in a stream of release announcements. So when you're a good info hub, you can automate figuring out what needs people's attention. And you can mark like little warning signs or just bold some parts so people can easily scan through the huge list of all the items that you've been announcing and see what's important. All right, and kind of connected to this, one more thing that a good info hub does well is notifying people who should be interested in this announcement. And for this one, I guess I'll just go again back to Crane. I'm going to describe the elements each with specific examples. So if we look at this message attachment here, first of all, we have, of course, the service that is being released. You can see on the top with the indicators that I consider this data coverage, and I also, obviously, it's a link. So just keep an eye on the top part, which will tell you which elements are being used in each of the elements of the message attachment. Okay, then a kind of a boring one, but also a good insight that you implicitly get timestamps. So that's pretty nice, when the release happened from here. Then the example of directing attention, as I mentioned before, we place a warning message with a nice little warning emoji if the current deployment is a rollback. So it's easy to see when something was fucked up. Next thing, this is the commit message describing what is actually being released. And here, notifying is highlighted because we have a feature that developers can include somebody's name in the commit message, and that person will be tagged when the release actually goes out or gets reverted. So for instance, if I'm committing something that will finally make our website work in China, then our Chinese business development manager can be automatically notified by just me committing this in the code or writing it in the commit message. Also, we have the commit message authors here. It's also notifying people who wrote the code that their code is being released. Pretty important information most of the time. And I guess I'll just skip through most of these real quick because by this point, you should be getting the point, I think. This is the environment that's being released, and also like, it directs attention when the environment is not production, or when a release failed on this environment, because then we go over to the status, which you see here was successful, but we highlight the message in red and direct attention to it, of course, if the release failed. Then we have the branch that is being released. Again, we are directing attention if it's not master. So if somebody's testing work in progress code, you know. And we attach some links, such as the Docker image, so people can easily pull it and experiment with the code that's being released. We have the releaser name. And finally, this is actually another really good implicit thing, just like the timestamp. You get a thread for each of these announcements. So now it's very obvious for all releases, like big or small, where the discussion should be happening or will be happening. Otherwise, before, when some people were not announcing their releases, before we had automation for it, like you had to kind of ask around where people are discussing this. Now all the discussions are in a centralized place. And that's pretty good. So these are all the questions that we can answer with just this tiny little compact message. And don't read all of them. I'll just give you the count, basically. The number of distinct questions for a release that we can answer like this is 19. But fine, like it's right that it's like 2 more, like, because like most of these are going to be irrelevant to people. We have 2 questions answered, let's say, per release automatically, but that's per release. So it means we answer 100 questions implicitly that people would have asked previously. And we also get the benefits of, directing attention and notifying, which we didn't have without the structured, consistent form of announcements. Also, there's one last mystery ingredient that I'm going to be talking about later, which is also pretty important. But yeah, let's just leave it for the end of the presentation. Here's another intermission. While building this integration, we basically found the silliest hack we ever could have in software engineering. I really cannot endorse this, but it's like so good. It's like so good, really. Like, just watch this. Basically, the architecture of one of these Slack integrations is as follows. We have this task runner, which is running, the deployment tasks, and then later, and in an isolated environment, it's running a revert task, and then it runs again for another deployment, let's say. Of course, second part of the equation is Slack, and we are posting messages to Slack. And also, we need a third thing for storing the state, like data about the deployments, to connect, like which deployment goes to which message, and so on. We need to store this in a database. So again, first we have the task runner. I'm going to color that blue because it's like the primary thing here. I'm going to color Slack green because we like Slack, and we like that we don't need to care about Slack. Like, they just work fine on their own. But like this database thing, it was so bad. Like, how are you even going to set up a database for something like this, and then have the credentials everywhere for every task that's running? And what are you even going to maintain for this? Like, would you maintain PostgreSQL or MySQL or something like that, or probably something simpler, right? So you could have Redis, much simpler to operate, or you could even use something hosted like S3. So you could just save all the data in objects in S3. But still, this is all so complicated. So what we figured out is we can store all of our data in Slack. And I'm just going to explain how this works. But basically, we don't need a database at all because we use Slack as a database. So a bit about Slack message formatting. You can have a link with a text and a URL like this. You put there google.com and the text like Google, and then it shows up like that. It just says Google instead of the entire URL. OK, so question, what do you think happens if you make the text a space? Obviously, the link is going to go in there, kind of, but it's not going to have any representation. I think Slack is doing some sort of space stripping from messages, so you get an empty message. So now you ended up with having a link, a URL in there that doesn't appear to humans ever, but you can still see it from machines. So you will realize maybe that this google.com thing, you can change it to like anything. And the way this helps us use Slack as a database is by putting the data, yeah, in the hidden URL. And that actually works. Like, I was so surprised, but it works, and we still, like, we've been running this for a year, and we just don't need our own database. We just basically are hitchhikers on Slack, and we stored the deployment data in there. Okay, and again, to go back to this example I've been showing you of a deployment, like, so that tiny space below Crane, that's our database, that white thing. All right. So that was the intermission in the middle of the talk. Let's go and jump straight into the second strategy for making the developer experience better, or basically the communication experience better. So this is just providing some sort of a thoughtful helper, something that improves or augments the user's messages with some context. And again, let's go to figure out when we can create some sort of a thoughtful helper for Slack. So where you use this approach is like, yeah, okay, so I can't tell you. It's like, you need to keep your eyes open to see when context would be useful. You need to ask yourself the question of how you're reacting to messages that you see. Like, you need to get really analytical about this. You need to try to find any sort of patterns in what you're doing when certain information reaches you and certain messages are visible to you. So I'm going to show you 2 examples of what we've used this for. The first one is a message like this. It's a link to an issue on our private issue tracker. So basically, it becomes quite obvious after a couple days that whenever you see a link like this in a message, so when somebody posts a link like this, I just open it to check the title every single time, basically, and everyone does this. So this is one of the first patterns that we noticed and built an integration for. So now nobody has to click the URL just to read the title of the issue. All of this is automatically posted to all of our GitLab links. So it's all visible in line, and we just saved, I don't know, like lots of tiny little tasks for people. Also, I can really recommend doing this with serverless deployment. You can really build something like this in a couple of hours. And we deployed it on AWS Lambda, and really we were done super quick with it. It's super easy and very helpful. All right, second example of when you can have a thoughtful helper. And I'm going to try to read this announcement out to you, the one that I'm going to be talking about. So it said, enabling full live traffic data feed, 50 MCC, partial unique content, starting with USPOS only, validated using IBP-TRX via new WSAP QVOID-CZ POS. Okay. So when somebody posts an announcement like this, I Google half of the words, and everybody does. Also, like on this slide, I was kind of worried at first that I'm going to be leaking some sensitive info. I didn't really understand what it was, so I didn't know if I'm breaching my NDA by posting it here. But then I realized that you don't understand it either, so it's fine, I guess. Okay. So what happens when somebody posts an announcement like this? We built a Slack comment. You can just type in somewhat caveman English, what packs? And you get the definition of packs. And now you understand the announcement. So that's pretty cool. It's not automatic context that we are providing here, but it's the closest we can get without getting really deep into AI and understanding what is an acronym. So it's really good enough. All right. And one final thing I want to talk about regarding these integrations is a quick note on polish. It's really important to have these integrations polished, to make your users feel delight when they are looking at these messages as far as you can go with that. So one example would be very often people make integrations like this top one, and they just don't do anything with kind of branding it. While our release bot has a really cool logo. I actually asked our design team to create one. Of course, it wasn't a big task. They were done in 10 minutes or so. But really, this sort of like brand, it really helps people like the integration. Another tiny detail, it's for the environment field in the messages. Initially, it was written like it is on the top. But then you realize that that's kind of not really, like, it's not nice visual design. It's difficult to glance at, it's difficult to scan. So if you just align these things, the emojis which are always fixed with, you just get a more delightful little message. It's really nice. And one more thing is, in this /what comment, it sometimes just tells you to Google it because it can't help you. So you would get a link like that on the top. It just says Google search, and then the link to Google. This is, again, something that just looks noisy and dirty. It's not nice. So the way we formatted the links in our Crane integration is this kind of nice, sleek, clean list of links with nice text fields. All right. And the reason I'm talking about all this delight your users thing is because delight makes adoption easier. People will definitely use your application more if it has a brand, if it feels good to use. And the reason adoption is so important, and this is the last piece of the puzzle that I was leaving as a mystery for later, is that the adoption of these tools impacts your culture at the company. In fact, when we created Crane, to have these automated release announcements, and it was, of course, an integrated automatic deployment tool. Most of the deployments at the company were happening manually, almost all of them. But because, all the cool kids started using these fancy release announcements instead of the plain text messages, somehow it was really easy to get people to switch over to automatic deployments, and now people, engineers, just got used to having this tool for them without having to convince them to, take the time to set it up, please, because I swear it will be better for you. Like, no, people actually wanted to switch to it. And I'm sure that part of it was because it just looked cool. And yeah, so that's kind of completes the equation of how Crane helped us. It covers tons of data per day. It directs the attention of people to what's important. It notifies people. And it's really great that we have this kind of framework, this tool for pinging people directly. Like without Slack, this would be super difficult. Like you don't know how to tag people or send a notification directly to somebody's phone without Slack, kind of. I mean, email is there, but again, like those notifications are skipped and they are not always on people's phones anyway, like in corporate environments or whatever. And yeah, last, it really, it improves our culture. If you design something, such as again with the downtime announcements, it kind of made people take downtimes more seriously now that we had this nice structure to how downtimes are presented. And we gave people an easy workflow to follow when they are resolving an outage. People are just taking it more seriously, and like it helps our recovery efforts. All right, so that's why it's good. Let's just recap real quick what I want you to do. First, you should build these info hubs on Slack to structure your announcements. And second, you should build these thoughtful helpers wherever you can provide useful context. And with that, I would like to ask you to consider joining us if any of this sounded interesting to you. And also, if this didn't really sound interesting, still join us because like most of our work is not this, actually. Like this is just some part of it. So yeah, try to go on kiwi.com/jobs. Just check out our job listings there, especially the platform team one, which is mine. And try to join us. Thank you. So taking questions now for like 5 more seconds, because I don't want to stand here in awkward silence. Oh yeah, sorry, it was so dark there, I didn't see. So right now, if you follow me at Underix, I will tweet it. I do post them somewhere, yeah. Like this is actually already hosted somewhere. It's on my GitLab. It's already public, so you can check it because it was the easiest way to get the slides to anyone as a backup. Yeah, I'll tweet it in like 5 minutes. So there's another question in front row. Oh, come on, I was talking about like Slack backend integrations. Yeah, the question was what I wrote the slides in. So it's using a JavaScript framework called Reveal.js. Some of the visualizations are custom JavaScript. But like the style of the slides is just the default Reveal.js one. Okay? Yeah? Okay, yeah. Okay, so the question is about whether there is some possibility to bring structure into the non-automated announcements, the manual ones that people write, whether people can follow the guidelines about data structures for something like this, the launch announcements. So first, I'll have to tell you, we actually have an app for launch announcements. I didn't think it would be worthy of mention. We didn't write it ourselves, we just got it in the Slack app directory. But anyway, we do have some sort of, for instance, new project announcements. What we do there, we didn't take the time to develop an application for structuring these announcements. What we do is we just create a message template and we pin it in the channel with all the placeholders, like here like your project name goes here, description goes here, and we put it in the channel topic that you should look at the pinned messages for the template. And it doesn't work very well. Like people still mess it up all the time, but it doesn't really matter in that case. All right? Anything else? Yeah, there's one more. So basically the question was that he loves Kiwi. And yeah, so it was just a feature suggestion, and I have to say, I think we already have this feature. Let's talk about it later. All right. I think that's probably it for questions, but I'm going to be hanging out over here anyway, so you can just come and talk. All right, thank you very much again.